The morning sun cast long shadows across the elite military training facility as Sarah adjusted her tactical gear for the 100th time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Today was the day she had worked toward for 3 years, the final evaluation that would determine if she could join the most elite special forces unit in the country. Sarah had grown up in a small town where her father ran a martial arts dojo. From the age of 5, she had trained in multiple combat disciplines, but her journey to this moment had been anything but smooth. Her father, Master, had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but his knowledge of ancient fighting techniques and a dream to build something meaningful in America. The facility buzzed with activity as 250 of the most elite forces gathered for what was supposed to be a routine demonstration. Sarah was the only woman among the candidates, a fact that hadn't gone unnoticed by everyone present. Whispers followed her wherever she walked, and she could feel the weight of skeptical stares on her shoulders. Lieutenant Colonel stood at the front of the assembly hall, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years in special operations. "Today, we're here to witness something unprecedented," he announced. "For the first time in our unit's history, we have a female candidate who has made it through every preliminary test." Sarah's heart pounded as she stood at attention among the other candidates. She had passed every physical test, every psychological evaluation, and every tactical exercise with flying colors. Yet she knew that many of the men around her still questioned whether she belonged here. Among the crowd of elite soldiers was Captain Jake, a decorated Navy SEAL with an ego as large as his reputation. He had heard about the female candidate and had made his opinions known to anyone who would listen. In his mind, Special Forces was no place for women, regardless of their qualifications. Jake leaned over to his teammate, Sergeant First Class Tony Martinez. "I can't believe they're actually considering her," he muttered under his breath. "This is going to be embarrassing for everyone involved." Tony, who had served alongside Jake for 5 years, had learned to navigate his friend's arrogance. "Maybe we should wait and see what she can do before making judgments," he suggested quietly. Jake scoffed. "Come on, Tony, look at her. She's probably 130 pounds soaking wet. How is she supposed to carry a wounded soldier out of combat? How is she supposed to match our physical capabilities? This whole thing is just political correctness gone too far." Sarah overheard fragments of conversations like this throughout the morning. She had developed thick skin over the years, but each dismissive comment still stung. Her father had taught her that actions spoke louder than words, and she was determined to let her performance do the talking. The demonstration began with various combat scenarios designed to showcase different aspects of Special Forces training. Sarah watched intently as teams of elite soldiers performed complex maneuvers, studying their techniques and strategies. She had trained for years to reach this level, sacrificing relationships, social life, and countless hours of sleep. Her journey had begun in her father's dojo, where she had shown an exceptional aptitude for martial arts from a very young age. Master had been initially reluctant to push his daughter too hard, but Sarah's determination and natural ability had convinced him to train her seriously. By the time she was 15, she could defeat most adult students in sparring matches. The turning point came when Sarah was 17. A group of local gang members had attempted to rob her father's dojo, not knowing that it was filled with trained fighters. Sarah had been alone in the building, practicing late into the evening, when 3 armed men burst through the front door. What happened next had shocked everyone, including Sarah herself. Moving with lightning speed and precision, she had disarmed all 3 men within 30 seconds, leaving them unconscious on the dojo floor. The security cameras had captured the entire encounter, and the footage had eventually made its way to military recruiters. Colonel had personally visited Sarah's family after seeing the footage. He had recognized something special in her abilities and had encouraged her to consider military service. Sarah's parents had been initially hesitant, but they could see the fire in their daughter's eyes when she talked about serving her country. Now, 3 years later, Sarah stood among the most elite warriors in the world, preparing to prove that she deserved to be there. The morning demonstrations concluded, and the attention turned to individual evaluations. Each candidate would be tested in hand-to-hand combat, marksmanship, tactical planning, and leadership under pressure. Sarah excelled in the marksmanship portion, consistently hitting targets that many experienced soldiers missed. Her tactical planning was innovative and effective, earning nods of approval from the evaluating officers. But she knew that the real test would come during the hand-to-hand combat portion. Captain Jake had been watching Sarah's performance with growing irritation. Her success in the other areas only reinforced his belief that the standards had been lowered to accommodate her. He was determined to prove his point during the combat demonstration. When Lieutenant Colonel announced that volunteers would be needed for sparring demonstrations, Jake's hand shot up immediately. "I'd like to volunteer to demonstrate proper technique," he announced loudly, his eyes fixed on Sarah. The tension in the room became palpable. Everyone understood what Jake was really asking for, a chance to publicly humiliate the female candidate and prove that women didn't belong in special forces. Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but she maintained her composure. This was exactly the kind of situation she had prepared for. Her father had taught her that bullies existed at every level, and the best way to deal with them was to face them head-on. Colonel sensed the underlying tension, but decided to allow the demonstration to proceed. He had his own reasons for wanting to see how Sarah would handle this challenge. The real world of special operations was unforgiving, and if she couldn't handle pressure from her own teammates, she wouldn't survive in enemy territory. "Very well, Captain," the colonel said. "Who would you like to spar with?" Jake's smile was predatory as he looked directly at Sarah. "I think it would be educational for everyone to see a realistic demonstration of combat effectiveness. I volunteer to spar with the candidate." The room fell silent. Everyone knew that Jake was one of the most skilled hand-to-hand combatants in the entire military. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall, weighed 210 pounds of solid muscle, and had trained in combat sports since childhood. The mismatch seemed obvious to everyone present. Sarah stepped forward without hesitation. "I accept," she said clearly, her voice carrying throughout the silent room. Some of the soldiers exchanged uncomfortable glances. They respected Jake's abilities, but this felt like watching a lion toy with a gazelle. Even those who supported Sarah's inclusion in the program worried about what was about to happen. Jake began stretching ostentatiously, making a show of his physical preparation. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'll go easy on you, wouldn't want to damage that pretty face." The condescending tone and inappropriate comment caused several officers to frown, but no one intervened. This was about to become a defining moment, and everyone sensed it. Sarah ignored the comment and began her own preparation ritual. She closed her eyes and centered herself, drawing on years of meditation and mental training that her father had instilled in her. In her mind, she could hear Master's voice. "Size and strength are advantages, but they are not everything. Speed, technique, and mental clarity can overcome brute force. Trust your training." When she opened her eyes, something had changed. The nervousness was gone, replaced by a calm focus that seemed to emanate from her very core. Those who had been around elite fighters recognized the transformation. Sarah had entered what athletes called the zone. The sparring area was cleared, and safety equipment was distributed. Jake waved off most of the protective gear, confident that he wouldn't need it. Sarah put on everything that was required, not out of fear, but out of respect for proper procedures. As they faced each other in the center of the mat, the size difference was stark. Jake looked like he could break Sarah in half without breaking a sweat. But experienced fighters in the audience noticed subtle details that others missed. Sarah's perfect balance, her efficient movement, the way she seemed to flow like water even while standing still. Colonel served as the referee. "This is a demonstration, not a blood sport," he announced. "The match ends when one fighter is clearly defeated or unable to continue. Begin when ready." Jake immediately began circling Sarah, trying to use his reach advantage to control the distance. He threw a few testing jabs, expecting her to back away or show signs of fear. Instead, Sarah absorbed the information from his movements, his patterns and preferences. "Come on, little girl," Jake taunted as he threw a more aggressive combination. "Fight back, show these men what you're made of." Sarah remained patient, deflecting his attacks with minimal effort while studying his style. She recognized that Jake was a brawler who relied primarily on his physical advantages. He was skilled, but he fought with anger and ego rather than discipline and clarity. The first real exchange came when Jake overextended on a powerful right cross. Sarah slipped the punch by mere inches and responded with a lightning-fast combination to his ribs. The strikes landed before Jake even realized he had been hit, causing him to grunt in surprise and pain. The audience stirred. Those who understood fighting recognized that Sarah had just demonstrated superior speed and timing. Jake's expression darkened as he realized that this might not be as easy as he had expected. "Lucky shot," he muttered, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried moments before. Jake decided to use his wrestling background and rushed forward, attempting to take Sarah to the ground where his size advantage would be overwhelming. This was exactly what Sarah had been expecting. As he charged forward, she used his momentum against him, executing a perfect hip throw that sent all 210 pounds of Jake crashing to the mat. The sound of his body hitting the ground echoed through the silent room. Jake rolled quickly and got back to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. The easy victory he had expected was turning into a nightmare. "You got lucky again," he snarled, but his breathing was already becoming labored from the impact. Sarah remained calm and centered. She could see that Jake was allowing his emotions to control his actions, which would make him increasingly predictable and vulnerable. Her father had taught her that an angry opponent was a defeated opponent, even if they didn't know it yet. The match continued with Jake becoming more aggressive and desperate. He threw wild combinations, trying to overwhelm Sarah with pure aggression. But every attack was either deflected, countered, or simply avoided with minimal effort. Sarah's movements were poetry in motion, fluid, efficient, and devastatingly effective. She was like water flowing around a rock, impossible to grasp but capable of wearing down even the hardest surfaces over time. The turning point came when Jake's frustration finally boiled over into pure rage. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "A seal that weak, you don't belong here." In his anger, Jake abandoned all technique and threw a wild haymaker intended to end the fight with brute force. It was exactly the opening Sarah had been waiting for. Time seemed to slow as she stepped inside his guard, deflected his arm upward, and delivered a perfectly placed strike to a pressure point on his neck. Jake's eyes widened in shock as his body betrayed him. His legs buckled, his vision blurred, and he crashed to the ground, unconscious before he even realized what had happened. The silence that followed was deafening. 250 of the most elite fighters in the world stared in stunned disbelief at the small woman standing calmly over the unconscious Navy SEAL. Sarah stepped back and bowed respectfully toward her fallen opponent, as her father had taught her to do after every match. She felt no satisfaction in Jake's defeat, only sadness that it had been necessary to prove her worth in such a public manner. Colonel was the first to break the silence. "Medic!" he called out calmly, though his own shock was evident in his voice. As medical personnel rushed to check on Jake, he looked at Sarah with new respect. The room gradually came back to life as the reality of what had happened sank in. Conversations began in hushed tones as elite soldiers processed what they had just witnessed. Many of them had trained with Jake and knew exactly how skilled he was. What Sarah had just accomplished should have been impossible. Dr. Watson, the unit's chief medical officer, finished examining Jake and announced that he was fine but would need a few minutes to fully regain consciousness. "It was a precision strike to a specific pressure point," she explained to Colonel. "Perfectly executed and completely non-damaging. He'll have a headache, but no lasting effects." As Jake slowly regained consciousness, he found himself staring up at concerned faces and bright lights. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was or what had happened. Then the memory came flooding back, and with it, a crushing sense of humiliation. Sarah had moved to a quiet corner of the room, trying to process what had just happened. She had known that this day would be challenging, but she hadn't expected it to unfold quite like this. Part of her felt vindicated, but a larger part felt sad that such a demonstration had been necessary. Sergeant First Class Tony Martinez approached her carefully. "That was incredible," he said quietly. "I've never seen anything like it. Jake is one of the toughest fighters I know." Sarah looked up at him with tired eyes. "I didn't want it to happen that way," she said softly. "I just wanted to prove that I could do the job." Tony nodded understanding. "I think you proved a lot more than that today." As the medical team helped Jake to his feet, he caught sight of Sarah across the room. The anger and humiliation in his eyes were unmistakable, but there was something else there too, a grudging respect for her skill, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. Colonel called for attention as the immediate drama subsided. "What we've witnessed today is exactly why our evaluation process exists," he announced. "Combat effectiveness cannot be measured by size, gender, or preconceived notions. It can only be measured by results." The afternoon continued with other evaluations, but the energy in the room had fundamentally changed. Sarah was no longer seen as an outsider trying to prove herself. She had become someone who commanded respect through her actions. As the day drew to a close, Sarah found herself reflecting on the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From her father's dojo to this elite military facility, every step had been preparation for today. But she knew that this was just the beginning of an even greater challenge. That evening, as the candidates were dismissed to their quarters, Sarah walked outside to get some fresh air. The sun was setting over the training facility, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. She thought about calling her parents to tell them about the day, but decided to wait until she knew the final results of her evaluation. A voice behind her interrupted her thoughts. That was quite a demonstration today. She turned to find Colonel approaching, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Thank you, sir," she replied formally. "I want you to know that what happened today changes nothing about your evaluation," he said. "You still have to complete all the same requirements as every other candidate." "I understand, sir. I wouldn't want it any other way." Studied her for a moment. "I believe you mean that," he said finally. "That's exactly the attitude we need in this unit." As he walked away, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she could take pride in knowing that she had stood her ground and proven that she belonged among the elite. The lights of the facility twinkled in the gathering darkness as Sarah made her way back to her quarters. She had no way of knowing that her demonstration today had set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, her limits, and the true meaning of strength. In his own quarters across the facility, Jake stared at the ceiling, his pride and worldview shattered. He had built his entire identity around being one of the strongest and most capable fighters in the military, and a woman half his size had made him look like an amateur in front of 250 of his peers. But perhaps more disturbing than the physical defeat was the nagging realization that his assumptions about women in combat might have been wrong. If Sarah could defeat him so easily, what did that mean about his other beliefs? What did it mean about himself? As both fighters settled in for the night, neither could have predicted how this single encounter would reshape their lives, their careers, and their understanding of what it truly meant to be strong. The following morning arrived with an unusual tension hanging over the elite training facility. Word of yesterday's demonstration had spread far beyond the 250 witnesses, reaching the highest levels of military command. Sarah woke before dawn, as was her custom, but found sleep elusive as she replayed the events in her mind. In the mess hall, conversation stopped when she entered. Some soldiers offered respectful nods, while others simply stared. Sarah had expected this reaction, but experiencing it was more uncomfortable than she had imagined. She collected her breakfast and found an empty table, preferring solitude to the awkward small talk that would inevitably focus on yesterday's incident. Captain Jake entered the mess hall 20 minutes later, sporting a visible bruise on his neck where Sarah's strike had landed. The normally confident SEAL moved differently. His shoulders weren't quite as square, his chin not quite as high. The whispers that followed him were different from those that had followed Sarah. They carried undertones of mockery and disappointment. Jake's teammates gathered around him as he sat down, their loyalty evident even in their concern. Sergeant First Class Tony Martinez was the first to speak. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Fine," Jake replied curtly, though his voice sounded rougher than usual. "It was just a lucky shot. Anyone can get caught off guard." Private First Class Danny, a younger member of their unit, shifted uncomfortably. "Jake, I saw the whole thing. That wasn't luck. She read your movements like a book and countered perfectly. My uncle taught me some martial arts growing up, and what she did was pure technique." Jake's jaw tightened. "Are you saying I got beaten by technique? I've been training in combat sports since I was 8 years old. I know technique." "Maybe," Danny said carefully, "but she knows different technique, stuff I've never seen before. The way she moved was like she was dancing or something." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel, who approached their table with purposeful strides. "Captain, I need to see you in my office immediately." Jake's stomach dropped. He had been dreading this conversation since he woke up. "Yes, sir," he replied, standing to follow. His office was decorated, featuring only the essential furniture and a few commendations on the walls. The colonel gestured for Jake to sit while he took his position behind the desk. "I've received several calls about yesterday's demonstration," began without preamble, "from very high-ranking officials who are concerned about the incident." Jake felt his career flashing before his eyes. "Sir, I can explain." Held up a hand. "I'm not interested in explanations, Captain. I'm interested in your assessment of candidates' abilities." The question caught Jake off guard. He had expected discipline, not a request for professional evaluation. "Sir, you've now experienced her combat capabilities firsthand. I want your honest assessment of her skills and her potential fit for our unit." Jake struggled to find words. His professional training told him to give an objective evaluation, but his bruised ego demanded otherwise. She's skilled, sir. More skilled than I initially assessed." "That's quite an understatement, considering she rendered you unconscious in front of 250 witnesses," said dryly. "Let me be more specific. In your professional opinion, could she handle herself in actual combat situations?" The question forced Jake to confront uncomfortable truths. Despite his humiliation, he couldn't deny what he had experienced. Sarah's movements had been flawless, her technique superior to anything he had encountered. "Based on what I observed, yes, sir. Her speed and precision are exceptional." Nodded. "I'm glad you can set aside your personal feelings to provide an objective assessment. That's exactly the kind of professionalism I expect from my officers." Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Sir, if I may ask, what's the status of my career after yesterday's incident?" "That depends entirely on how you handle yourself going forward," replied. "Yesterday's demonstration revealed weaknesses in your approach that need to be addressed. I'm assigning you to additional training with Master Sergeant Williams in advanced martial arts techniques." The assignment was both a relief and another blow to Jake's pride. Relief because his career wasn't over, but humbling because it essentially confirmed that his skills were inadequate compared to Sarah's. Meanwhile, Sarah was facing her own challenges. She had been summoned to a different office for a meeting with Dr. Watson, the unit's chief psychologist. Unlike the clinical setting of his office, Dr. Watson's space was warm and welcoming, designed to put people at ease. "Please sit anywhere you're comfortable," Dr. Watson said with a genuine smile. "I want to discuss yesterday's events, but not in the way you might expect." Sarah chose a chair facing the window, appreciating the natural light. "I assume this is about the altercation with Captain." "Partially, yes, but I'm more interested in your psychological state during and after the incident. How did you feel when you realized you had rendered him unconscious?" The question prompted Sarah to examine feelings she had been trying to suppress. "Honestly, I felt sad, not proud or vindicated, just sad that it had been necessary." Dr. Watson made notes while maintaining eye contact. "That's an interesting response. Many people in your situation would feel satisfaction or triumph. Why sadness?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Because it means I failed to find a better solution. My father always taught me that fighting should be a last resort, used only when all other options are exhausted. Yesterday felt inevitable, but I keep wondering if I could have handled it differently." "You feel responsible for the conflict?" "Not entirely. Captain created the situation through his behavior and choices, but once it began, I became responsible for how it ended. I could have simply defended myself and let him tire out. Instead, I chose to end it decisively." Dr. Watson leaned forward slightly. "Why did you make that choice?" "Because a prolonged fight would have been more humiliating for him and more traumatic for everyone watching. A quick, clean end seemed like the most merciful option." The psychologist nodded thoughtfully. "That level of tactical and emotional consideration during a high-stress situation is remarkable. It suggests exceptional emotional intelligence and self-control." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "I don't feel particularly exceptional. I just tried to handle a difficult situation the best way I could." "Which is exactly what makes you exceptional," Dr. Watson replied with a smile. "Tell me about your training background. How did you develop such advanced combat skills?" Sarah's expression softened as she thought about her father. "My dad immigrated from Taiwan when he was 25. He had grown up studying traditional martial arts in a very disciplined environment. When he opened his dojo in America, he tried to recreate that same level of dedication and respect. And he trained you from a young age. Yes, but not the way most people think. He didn't just teach me how to fight. He taught me why fighting exists when it's appropriate and how to carry the responsibility that comes with having dangerous skills. Dr. Watson made more notes. Can you elaborate on that responsibility? Sarah paused, searching for the right words. He used to say that every technique he taught me was like giving me a loaded weapon. I could use it to protect people or hurt people, but either way, I would be responsible for the consequences. He made me understand that real strength isn't about defeating others. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. Is that why you wanted to join Special Forces? Initially, yes. I thought it was the best way to use my abilities to serve something greater than myself. But after yesterday, I'm starting to question whether I truly understand what that means. Dr. Watson set down her pen and leaned back. Sarah, I've been evaluating military personnel for 15 years. I've seen how combat affects people, how power corrupts, and how the strongest individuals often struggle with the responsibility of their abilities. What you demonstrated yesterday wasn't just physical skill, it was wisdom. Sarah looked up, surprised by the assessment. You had the power to seriously injure Captain, possibly end his career, and publicly destroy his reputation. Instead, you neutralized the threat with minimal damage and showed respect for a defeated opponent. That level of restraint and compassion is exactly what we need in elite units. The conversation continued for another hour, covering Sarah's family background, her motivations, and her understanding of leadership. When it concluded, Dr. Watson had filled several pages with notes, most of them positive observations about Sarah's psychological fitness for special operations. That afternoon, both Sarah and Jake found themselves in the same advanced tactics classroom, along with 20 other candidates. The instructor was Major Hayes, a legendary figure in special operations with experience in multiple theaters of combat. Major Hayes addressed the group without mentioning the previous day's incident. Today we're going to discuss something that many of you have probably never considered, the psychology of intimidation and how it affects combat effectiveness. She began drawing diagrams on the whiteboard. Most people assume that intimidation is about size, aggression, or reputation, but true intimidation comes from competence, confidence, and unpredictability. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling as though the lesson was directed at him personally. The most dangerous opponents are those who remain calm under pressure, who don't telegraph their intentions, and who can adapt instantly to changing circumstances, Hayes continued. These individuals are intimidating not because they look scary, but because they represent an unknown variable that can't be easily calculated or countered. She turned to face the class. Who can give me an example of this type of intimidation from their own experience? Several hands went up, but Major Hayes pointed to a student in the back. What's your take? Danny stood up. Ma'am, I was thinking about yesterday's demonstration. Captain is one of the most physically imposing people I've ever met, but Candidate was intimidating in a completely different way. She was calm when she should have been nervous, patient when she should have been aggressive. It was like she knew something the rest of us didn't. Jake's face flushed as his subordinate analyzed his defeat in front of the entire class. Major Hayes nodded approvingly. Excellent observation. Candidate, would you like to comment on this assessment? Sarah stood up reluctantly. Ma'am, I don't think I was intimidating anyone. I was just trying to stay focused on the task at hand. And that focus, that calmness under pressure, became intimidating to your opponent, Hayes explained. Captain, what was your experience during that encounter? Jake stood slowly, his jaw tight with embarrassment. Ma'am, Candidate's composure was unsettling. She didn't react the way I expected. It made her unpredictable and difficult to read. Exactly, Hayes said. True intimidation isn't about making noise or posturing. It's about demonstrating competence so clearly that opponents question their own abilities. The lesson continued with practical exercises in reading body language, controlling emotional responses, and maintaining tactical awareness under stress. Sarah and Jake were paired together for several drills, creating an awkward dynamic that the entire class could feel. During a scenario where they had to coordinate a simulated hostage rescue, their different approaches became evident. Jake relied on aggressive tactics and overwhelming force, while Sarah favored patience, precision, and minimal collateral damage. Both approaches had merit, but their philosophical differences created tension. "Your method is too slow," Jake muttered during a planning phase. "In real combat, hesitation gets people killed." "And recklessness gets hostages killed," Sarah replied calmly. "Speed isn't always the answer." Their instructor observed the exchange with interest. The dynamic between them represented a broader philosophical divide within special operations, the balance between aggressive action and careful precision. After class, Jake found himself walking alongside Tony Martinez toward their quarters. "I can't figure her out," he admitted to his friend. "Everything I thought I knew about combat effectiveness has been turned upside down." Tony had been thinking about the same issues. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe we've been approaching this all wrong." "What do you mean?" "I mean maybe we've been so focused on being the biggest, strongest, most aggressive fighters that we've forgotten about being the ones." Jake considered this perspective as they walked. His entire identity had been built around physical dominance and aggressive tactics. Accepting that a different approach might be superior would require fundamental changes in how he viewed himself and his profession. That evening, Sarah received a message asking her to report to Colonel's office. She arrived to find not only the Colonel, but also General, the base commander, and one of the highest-ranking women in the military. "Candidate," General began, "your performance yesterday has attracted attention from the Pentagon. I've been asked to conduct a personal evaluation." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Ma'am, I hope my actions didn't create any problems for the program." "On the contrary," the General replied with a slight smile. "Your actions have generated significant interest in expanding opportunities for women in special operations, but that also creates pressure and expectations that you need to be prepared for." Colonel leaned forward. "Sarah, if you're accepted into this unit, you'll become a symbol whether you want to be or not. Every mission, every action, every mistake will be scrutinized more carefully than any male operator would face." General nodded. "The question is whether you're prepared for that level of scrutiny and responsibility." Sarah thought about her father's teachings, about the responsibility that came with her abilities, and about the young women who might follow in her footsteps. "Ma'am, I've never wanted to be a symbol or a trailblazer. I just want to serve my country to the best of my abilities. But if my service can open doors for others, then I accept that responsibility." "Good answer," General said. "But understand that acceptance into this unit is still dependent on completing all requirements at the same standard as every other candidate. Your demonstration yesterday was impressive, but it's only one data point." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering Sarah's long-term career goals, her understanding of the challenges she would face, and her commitment to the program. When it concluded, Sarah felt both honored and burdened by the expectations being placed on her. As she walked back to her quarters, she encountered Jake emerging from the base gym. He had clearly been working out intensively, his shirt soaked with sweat and his expression determined. They paused awkwardly, neither sure how to interact after everything that had happened. Jake said finally, his voice lacking its usual cockiness. She replied neutrally. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "My behavior yesterday was unprofessional and inappropriate. Regardless of my personal opinions, you didn't deserve that treatment." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity but finding only genuine remorse. "I appreciate that. I know it wasn't personal. You were defending something you believe in." "Yeah, well, maybe what I believed in was wrong," Jake admitted. "I've been doing some thinking about assumptions and prejudices. Turns out I had more of them than I realized." They stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Jake spoke again. "For what it's worth, you're the most skilled fighter I've ever faced. Male or female, that was an impressive demonstration." Sarah nodded acknowledgement. "Thank you. I hope we can work together professionally if we're both selected for the unit." "I'd like that," Jake said, and he seemed to mean it. As they parted ways, both carried the weight of changed perspectives and new understanding. The events of the previous day had forced them to confront assumptions and beliefs they had held for years. For Sarah, it meant accepting the burden of representation and the responsibility of being a pioneer. For Jake, It meant questioning everything he thought he knew about strength, effectiveness, and what it meant to be an elite warrior. The following days would bring new challenges, deeper revelations, and tests that would push both of them beyond their comfort zones. But the foundation for mutual respect had been established, built on the ashes of preconceptions and the solid ground of demonstrated competence. Neither could know that their paths would soon intertwine in ways that would challenge not only their professional abilities, but their understanding of loyalty, sacrifice, and what it truly meant to serve something greater than themselves. 3 weeks had passed since the demonstration that changed everything at the elite training facility. The final selection process was entering its most demanding phase, a 2-week field exercise that would test every aspect of the candidate's abilities under extreme conditions. Sarah and Jake had both survived the preliminary cuts, but the real test was about to begin. The exercise would simulate a deep reconnaissance mission in hostile territory, complete with simulated enemy forces, resource scarcity, and the psychological pressure that came with prolonged isolation. Only half of the remaining candidates would be selected for the final program, and everyone knew that this exercise would determine their fate. Sarah stood with 37 other candidates in the pre-dawn darkness of the staging area, listening to Major Hayes outline the mission parameters. They would be divided into 6 teams of 6 or 7 members each, inserted into different sectors of a vast training ground that replicated enemy territory with remarkable accuracy. Your mission is to gather intelligence on 3 high-value targets, establish a communications relay point, and extract a simulated prisoner from a heavily guarded compound, Major Hayes announced. You'll have minimal equipment, no resupply, and constant pressure from opposing forces who know you're coming. Jake found himself assigned to Team Alpha, along with Tony Martinez, Danny, and 3 other experienced operators. Sarah was placed on Team Bravo with Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, a communications specialist, Lieutenant James Park, an explosives expert, and 3 other soldiers she had worked with during previous training exercises. The team assignments had been carefully considered by the evaluation staff. They wanted to see how Sarah would function as part of an integrated unit, and how Jake would perform when he wasn't the obvious alpha leader. Both would be challenged in different ways. Team Bravo's insertion went smoothly, with Sarah taking point as they moved through dense forest terrain toward their first objective. Her background in martial arts had given her an unusual ability to move silently through difficult terrain, and her teammates quickly recognized her value as a scout. Lieutenant Park whispered instructions as they approached their first checkpoint. Take us around the eastern perimeter. Santos, keep monitoring for enemy communications. Everyone else, maintain spacing and watch for ambush positions. Sarah moved like a shadow through the underbrush, pausing frequently to listen and observe before signaling the team forward. Her training in traditional martial arts had emphasized awareness of one's environment as much as combat technique, and those skills were proving invaluable in this context. 20 kilometers away, Team Alpha was facing different challenges. Jake's natural aggressiveness was serving them well in direct confrontations with opposing forces, but his tendency to rush into situations was creating tactical problems. Slow down, Tony Martinez urged as they approached a simulated enemy checkpoint. This isn't about speed, it's about intelligence gathering. Jake bit back his instinctive response. The past 3 weeks had taught him to question his first impulses, but changing ingrained behavior patterns was proving more difficult than he had expected. You're right. Let's observe first, then plan our approach. The difference in approach became evident as the exercise progressed. Team Bravo moved methodically, gathering detailed intelligence and avoiding unnecessary confrontations. Team Alpha was more aggressive, engaging enemy forces when they could have remained undetected, but also achieving some objectives more quickly. On the 3rd day of the exercise, both teams received emergency orders that would change the nature of their mission. Intelligence suggested that one of their target objectives contained not just information, but also a real prisoner, a captured intelligence operative who had been used as part of the training scenario without the candidate's knowledge. The revelation transformed the exercise from a training event into a genuine rescue mission. The stakes were suddenly real, and every decision would have actual consequences for a fellow service member. Colonel monitored the situation from the command center, where he watched multiple screens showing the positions and activities of all teams. General stood beside him, observing how the candidates responded to the changed circumstances. "This is exactly the kind of situation they'll face in the real world," General observed. "The ability to adapt when parameters change unexpectedly is crucial for special operations." On screen, they could see Sarah's team adjusting their approach as the new information came through. Sarah called for a team meeting, spreading out a hand-drawn map she had been creating during their movement. "The original plan won't work anymore," she said quietly. "If there's a real prisoner in there, we need to prioritize their safety over mission completion." Sergeant Santos nodded agreement. "Our approach route is too exposed for a rescue operation. We need to find a way to get closer without being detected." Lieutenant Park studied the map. "There's a drainage culvert that runs under the compound. If we could access it, we might be able to get inside without going through the main defenses." Sarah traced the route with her finger. "That could work, but we'd need a diversion to draw attention away from the insertion point, and we'd need someone small enough to navigate the drainage system." Everyone looked at her. At 125 pounds, Sarah was by far the smallest member of the team. "I'll go," she said without hesitation, "but I'll need backup position to support extraction if things go wrong." Meanwhile, Team Alpha was approaching the same challenge with characteristic directness. Jake studied the compound through binoculars, counting guards and identifying defensive positions. "We hit them hard and fast," he said to his team. "Overwhelming force straight through the main entrance. They won't expect such an aggressive approach." Tony Martinez frowned. "Jake, if there's a real prisoner in there, we could be putting them in danger. Maybe we should consider a more subtle approach." Danny nodded agreement. "My uncle always said that the best way to rescue someone is to get them out without anyone knowing they were ever there." Jake felt his old instincts warring with the new perspectives he had been developing. The aggressive approach felt right, felt natural, but he couldn't ignore the valid concerns his teammates were raising. "You're both right," he admitted finally. "Let me think about alternatives." This moment of self-reflection represented a significant change for Jake. 3 weeks earlier, he would have dismissed his teammates' concerns and proceeded with his original plan. Now, he was learning to value input and question his own assumptions. Both teams spent the next several hours conducting detailed reconnaissance and refining their plans. As evening approached, they prepared to execute their respective rescue attempts. Team Bravo's approach was methodical and precise. Sarah approached the drainage culvert in complete darkness, using skills her father had taught her about moving silently and controlling her breathing. The confined space was claustrophobic, but her small size allowed her to navigate obstacles that would have stopped larger team members. Inside the compound, she could hear voices and movement above her head. Using hand signals taught in military training combined with gestures her father had used in the dojo, she communicated her position to the support team through a fiber-optic camera system they had improvised. The prisoner was being held in a basement room directly above her position. Sarah carefully removed a drain grate and emerged into a storage area that connected to the detention facility. Her heart pounded as she realized that this was no longer a simulation. She was conducting a real rescue operation with genuine consequences. Team Alpha's approach was more conventional but equally well planned. They had identified a weakness in the perimeter security and planned a coordinated assault that would neutralize guards quickly while minimizing noise and chaos. Jake led the breach team with Tony and Danny providing overwatch and communications support. Despite his natural aggressiveness, Jake forced himself to move slowly and deliberately, prioritizing stealth over speed. Both teams reached their respective objectives at almost the same time, but the situations they found were dramatically different. Sarah discovered that the prisoner was actually Captain Lisa, an intelligence officer who had volunteered for the exercise but had become genuinely trapped when a structural collapse blocked the primary exit route. She was conscious but injured, with a possible concussion and a broken wrist. "I'm with Team Bravo," Sarah whispered as she approached Captain. "We're here to get you out." Captain looked up with relief and confusion. This wasn't supposed to be real. The whole thing was supposed to be simulated. "Plans changed," Sarah replied softly. "Can you move?" Team Alpha discovered a different situation entirely. The compound they were attacking contained no real prisoner, only the simulated scenario they had been expecting. But their assault had been detected by the opposing forces, and they were now trapped in a firefight with superior numbers. Jake found himself in exactly the kind of situation where his aggressive instincts were most valuable. Tony, Danny, fall back to the secondary position. We'll leapfrog out of here. The extraction became a running battle, with Team Alpha using movement and suppressive fire to avoid being overwhelmed by opposing forces. Jake's tactical leadership was superb, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they had failed to adapt properly to the changed circumstances. Sarah's extraction of Captain required different skills entirely. Moving through the drainage system with an injured person was slow and dangerous, requiring patience and precise coordination with the support team above. Halfway through the extraction, Captain began showing signs of worsening head trauma. Sarah realized that they needed immediate medical attention, which meant abandoning stealth for speed. "Santos, we need medical evacuation now," she whispered into her communication device. "The prisoner has serious head injuries." The response came quickly. "Understood. Emergency extraction team is en route. Can you get to the eastern perimeter?" Sarah looked at Captain, who was struggling to remain conscious. "We'll make it," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure how. What followed was one of the most challenging hours of Sarah's life. Moving through hostile territory with an injured person, avoiding detection while racing against time, required every skill she had developed over years of training. Her martial arts background proved crucial, not for fighting, but for the balance, coordination, and body control needed to carry someone through difficult terrain. Her father's emphasis on protecting others rather than defeating them had prepared her for exactly this situation. Team Alpha completed their extraction successfully, but Jake felt frustrated by their failure to adapt to the real prisoner scenario. They had executed their original mission flawlessly, but had missed the more important objective entirely. As both teams reached their extraction points, the full scope of what had happened became clear. Team Bravo had successfully rescued a real prisoner under genuinely dangerous circumstances. Team Alpha had completed a simulated mission, but had failed to recognize and adapt to the changed priorities. At the debrief session 3 days later, Colonel addressed both teams while the other candidates listened. "Team Alpha, your tactical execution was excellent. Your fire and movement techniques were textbook perfect, and your coordination under pressure was outstanding. However, you failed to adapt when the mission parameters changed." Jake accepted the criticism with newfound humility. "Sir, we focused on what we knew how to do instead of what the situation required. I take full responsibility for that failure of leadership." Nodded. "Good. Learning from failure is more important than avoiding it. Team Bravo, your mission success saved a fellow service member from serious injury. Your adaptability and prioritization of human life over mission objectives represents exactly the kind of decision-making we need." Sarah shifted uncomfortably with the praise. "Sir, we were just doing our job. Captain needed help and we helped her." That attitude, treating extraordinary actions as routine duty, is precisely what makes someone suitable for special operations, replied. The exercise continued for another week, but the prisoner rescue had fundamentally altered how the candidates viewed their training and each other. Sarah's quiet competence had earned respect not just from her own team, but from everyone who heard about the rescue. Jake found himself in the unusual position of learning from someone he had initially dismissed. During training exercises, he began asking Sarah for advice on silent movement techniques and situational awareness. To his surprise, she was generous with her knowledge and never made him feel inadequate for asking. "Your father sounds like an interesting man," Jake said during one evening conversation. "I'd like to meet him someday." Sarah smiled. "He'd like you. He always said that true warriors are those who can admit when they're wrong and learn from others." "Even small women who knock out Navy SEALs?" Jake asked with a rueful grin. "Especially them," Sarah replied, returning the smile. Their friendship was developing slowly, built on mutual respect earned through shared challenges. Jake was learning to appreciate different definitions of strength, while Sarah was learning to value the confidence and decisiveness that had made Jake successful in other contexts. The final week of the exercise brought new challenges that would test their evolving partnership. Intelligence suggested that a high-value target was planning to move through their operational area, presenting an opportunity for capture that could significantly impact national security. The mission would require combining Team Alpha's aggressive capabilities with Team Bravo's subtle approach. For the first time, Sarah and Jake would need to work together as co-leaders, blending their different philosophies into a unified strategy. As they planned the operation, both realized that their initial conflict had evolved into something more valuable than either had expected. They had become better operators by learning from each other, and their combined capabilities exceeded what either could accomplish alone. "You know," Jake said as they studied satellite imagery of the target area, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you knocked me out that first day." Sarah looked up from the photographs. "Why?" "Because it forced me to question everything I thought I knew about strength and effectiveness. I'm a better soldier because of it." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "My father always said that the best teachers are often disguised as opponents. Maybe we were supposed to challenge each other." As they finalized their plans for the most important mission of their careers, both Sarah and Jake carried the wisdom earned through conflict, respect gained through competence, and the knowledge that true strength came not from individual supremacy, but from the ability to bring out the best in others. The stage was set for a final test that would determine not only their fitness for special operations, but their understanding of what it meant to be part of something greater than themselves. The intelligence briefing arrived at 300 hours, waking every candidate from deep sleep with its urgency. Sarah found herself sitting in a secure conference room alongside Jake and 10 other remaining candidates, staring at satellite photographs that showed a convoy moving toward their training area. Colonel entered with an expression more serious than any they had seen during the entire selection process. Behind him walked a man in civilian clothes who radiated the kind of quiet authority that came only from decades of intelligence work. "This is Deputy Director Harrison from the agency," announced. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels, and your participation is entirely voluntary." Harrison stepped forward, his weathered face grave in the fluorescent lighting. 12 hours ago, our intelligence network identified a high-value terrorist operative attempting to cross into Mexico through this region. Al has been responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 continents and has eluded capture for 5 years. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as the implications became clear. This was no longer a training exercise. "Al believes he's traveling through uninhabited wilderness," Harrison continued. "He doesn't know about this training facility or your presence here. This represents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to capture one of the world's most wanted terrorists." Jake leaned forward, his tactical mind already working through possibilities. "Sir, what are our rules of engagement?" "Capture if possible, eliminate if necessary," Harrison replied bluntly. "Al has information about planned attacks that could save thousands of lives, but he also travels with a protection detail of experienced fighters who won't hesitate to kill anyone who threatens their mission." Added his own perspective. "To be clear, this mission will be led by active special operations personnel. You candidates would serve in support roles only. But the volunteer nature means that choosing not to participate will not affect your selection status." The room fell silent as each candidate weighed the implications. This was exactly the kind of operation they had been training for, but the transition from simulation to reality was jarring. Sarah thought about her father's teachings regarding the responsibility that came with her abilities. Master had always emphasized that true martial artists served others before themselves, protecting those who could not protect themselves. If Al was indeed planning attacks on innocent civilians, stopping him was exactly the kind of duty she had trained for. "I volunteer," she said quietly but clearly. Jake spoke immediately after her. "I volunteer as well." One by one, the other candidates added their voices until all 12 had volunteered for the mission, nodded with visible pride. "Very well, you have 2 hours to prepare. This will be a joint operation with Delta Force operators who are being flown in from Fort. Master Sergeant will coordinate assignments." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of preparation and planning. Sarah found herself assigned to an observation post that would monitor the convoy's approach route, while Jake was placed with an assault team that would conduct the actual capture operation. The mission plan was elegant in its simplicity. Al's convoy would be channeled through a narrow canyon where natural limited their options for escape or evasion. Observation posts on the high ground would provide early warning and overwatch, while assault teams positioned at both ends of the canyon would execute a coordinated capture operation. Sarah's position was designated Overwatch 3, located on a rocky outcropping that provided excellent visibility of the approach route. She would be working with Sergeant Maria Santos and a Delta Force operator named Staff Sergeant Murphy. Murphy was a 15-year veteran who had seen combat in multiple theaters. He studied Sarah with professional interest as they hiked to their position in pre-dawn darkness. "I heard about what happened during selection," he said quietly as they climbed. "That's some impressive technique you displayed." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the attention her demonstration continued to generate. "I just did what I was trained to do." "Yeah, well, not many people are trained to knock out Navy SEALs with their bare hands," Murphy replied with a grin. "Mind if I ask where you learned those skills?" As they established their observation post, Sarah found herself sharing stories about her father's dojo and the traditional martial arts training that had shaped her entire approach to combat and life. Murphy listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed his own deep understanding of hand-to-hand combat. "Your father sounds like a wise man," Murphy said as they set up their surveillance equipment. "The best fighters I've known have always been the ones who understood that fighting was about more than just winning." 3 kilometers away, Jake was experiencing his own education in advanced tactical operations. The Delta Force team leader, Master Sergeant Carlos, was legendary within special operations circles for his tactical brilliance and calm leadership under pressure. "Right," said as they checked equipment. "I've read your file. Impressive combat record, but says you've been learning some new perspectives lately." Jake nodded, feeling slightly embarrassed. "Yes, Sergeant, I've been forced to reconsider some of my assumptions about combat effectiveness." Smiled knowingly. "Good. The best operators are the ones who never stop learning. Today you'll get to see how we blend aggressive action with surgical precision." The assault team's position was in a cluster of boulders at the southern end of the canyon. From there, they could control the convoy's exit route while remaining hidden until the moment of engagement. Jake found himself studying preparation methods, noting how the experienced operator balanced confidence with meticulous attention to detail. At 800 hours, the first surveillance reports came through the communication network. Al's convoy consisted of 3 vehicles carrying approximately 12 personnel total. Initial observations suggested they were well-armed and professionally trained, making the operation significantly more dangerous than typical law enforcement actions. Sarah watched through high-powered binoculars as the convoy approached her observation sector. The lead vehicle was a modified pickup truck with a mounted machine gun, followed by an SUV with darkened windows, and a second pickup truck bringing up the rear. "Overwatch 3 to control," she whispered into her radio. "Convoy is proceeding on schedule. Count 12 personnel, heavy weapons visible. They're maintaining good tactical spacing and appear alert to potential threats." Colonel's voice came back immediately. "Copy, Overwatch 3. Continue surveillance and report any changes." Jake's position received similar updates as the convoy entered the canyon. Master Sergeant made final adjustments to his team's positioning, ensuring that they could initiate contact from positions of advantage. "Remember," told his assault team, "our priority is capturing Al alive. He's traveling in the middle vehicle. We want to immobilize the convoy first, then extract the target before his security team can respond effectively." The plan began to unfold with military precision. Explosive devices hidden in the canyon walls detonated simultaneously, creating rock slides that blocked both the entrance and exit routes. The convoy was trapped in a box canyon with nowhere to run and limited options for defense. Al's security team reacted with professional competence, immediately establishing defensive positions and returning fire toward the perceived threat locations. The middle vehicle reversed rapidly, seeking cover behind the rear truck while armed men deployed to establish a perimeter. Sarah watched the engagement unfold from her elevated position, providing real-time intelligence to the assault teams below. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes and movement as the battle developed. "Overwatch 3 to Assault 1. she radioed. Target vehicle is positioned behind the rear truck. I count 4 personnel establishing defensive positions on the eastern side of their perimeter. Jake's team began their approach from the south, using smoke grenades and coordinated movement to close distance while avoiding the heaviest defensive fire. His leadership was evident in how smoothly the team functioned under pressure, each member knowing exactly what to do without detailed instructions. But Al's security team was more capable than anticipated. Instead of simply defending their position, they began an organized counterattack designed to break through the encirclement and escape into the surrounding wilderness. The battle plan began to break down as the enemy refused to behave according to expectations. Instead of being trapped and neutralized, Al's team was fighting back with tactical sophistication that surprised even the experienced Delta Force operators. "Control, this is Assault 1. His voice came through the radio with obvious strain. "Enemy is conducting organized breakout attempt. We need additional support to maintain containment." From her observation post, Sarah could see the entire tactical situation developing. Al's team was using coordinated fire and movement to push toward a gap in the encirclement that the assault teams hadn't been able to cover adequately. "Overwatch 3 to Control," she reported urgently. "Enemy team is maneuvering toward grid reference 347,291. They're going to break containment in approximately 3 minutes unless someone can intercept them." The response came back immediately. "All units, converge on grid reference 347,291. Prevent enemy escape at all costs." Sarah looked at the tactical situation and made a decision that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. The intercept point was too far from any of the assault teams for them to reach in time, but it was within range of her observation post. "Santos Murphy, I'm going down there," she announced, already gathering her equipment. Sergeant Murphy grabbed her arm. "Negative. Our orders are to maintain observation and provide intelligence support. We're not supposed to engage directly." Sarah looked at him with calm determination. "Ali's going to escape if someone doesn't stop him. That's our mission failure." "There are 5 armed terrorists down there," Murphy protested. "This isn't a training exercise where you can knock someone out and walk away." Sarah checked her weapon and adjusted her gear. "My father taught me that when people's lives are in danger, you act according to what's right, not what's safe." Before either of her teammates could stop her, Sarah was moving down the rocky slope toward the intercept point. Her martial arts training allowed her to move quickly over difficult terrain while maintaining balance and control. Santos grabbed the radio. "Control, Overwatch 3 is moving to intercept enemy breakout. Single operator unsupported." Colonel's voice exploded through the communication network. "Negative. Order Overwatch 3 to return to position immediately." But Sarah had already switched her radio to a different channel and was committed to her course of action. Through her scope, she could see Al's team approaching the gap in their encirclement, approximately 2 minutes away from successful escape. Jake heard the radio traffic and understood immediately what was happening. Sarah was attempting to single-handedly stop 5 armed terrorists from escaping. The thought of her facing such overwhelming odds sent ice through his veins. "I need to support Overwatch 3, he said urgently. Master Sergeant was coordinating movement of his entire team toward the intercept point. "Negative. We're all moving to support, but she's got at least 60 seconds alone before anyone can reach her." Jake felt helpless as he realized that Sarah was about to face the most dangerous situation of her life with no backup and no support. Everything they had learned about each other, all the respect and friendship that had developed between them, might be about to end in a hail of gunfire in a remote canyon. Sarah reached the intercept point 30 seconds before Al's team arrived. The terrain provided minimal cover, just a few scattered boulders and sparse vegetation. Against 5 armed and desperate men, her chances of survival seemed minimal. But Master had prepared his daughter for exactly this kind of situation. Not just the physical skills needed for combat, but the mental discipline required to act with clarity and precision when everything depended on split-second decisions. Sarah positioned herself behind the largest available boulder and controlled her breathing, centering her mind the way her father had taught her. She would have one opportunity to stop Al's escape, and failure would mean not just her own death, but the loss of intelligence that could prevent future terrorist attacks. Al's team approached the gap in the encirclement in single file, moving quickly but carefully through the rocky terrain. Sarah could see the terrorist leader clearly, a tall, bearded man in desert camouflage who moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. As the lead element of his security team passed her position, Sarah made her move. She emerged from cover with explosive speed, striking the point man with a combination that dropped him instantly while simultaneously disarming him and taking his weapon. The remaining 4 men reacted with professional speed, but Sarah's initial attack had given her the initiative and the element of surprise. Moving with fluid precision, she used the terrain and her superior mobility to engage them on her own terms. The battle that followed was unlike anything that had been captured during training exercises. Sarah fought with deadly efficiency, using every skill her father had taught her while adapted to the realities of armed combat. She moved like water around their attempts to pin her down, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before they could respond effectively. Jake's assault team reached the battle site just as Sarah was engaging the last 2 members of Al's security detail. What they saw everything they thought they knew about combat effectiveness. Sarah was fighting 2 armed men simultaneously while protecting the unconscious form of Al, whom she had somehow managed to capture alive during the engagement. Her movements were poetry in motion, deadly, beautiful, and absolutely effective. The final terrorist fell as Jake reached firing position, leaving Sarah standing alone among 5 defeated enemies, breathing hard but apparently uninjured. Overwatch 3, report status, his voice came through the radio. Sarah keyed her microphone with hands that trembled slightly from adrenaline. High-value target secured, 5 enemy personnel neutralized, I'm fine. The silence that followed spoke volumes about how unprecedented her achievement had been. Jake approached Sarah with a mixture of admiration and concern. Are you hurt? She shook her head, looking down at the unconscious terrorist leader. He's alive but unconscious. The others? She gestured toward the scattered security team members, some unconscious, others clearly deceased. Sarah, Jake said quietly, what you just did was impossible. 5 armed men by yourself and you captured the target alive. Sarah sat down heavily on a nearby rock as the adrenaline began to fade. My father used to say that impossible was just another word for something we hadn't figured out how to do yet. As medical and security personnel arrived to secure the scene, Colonel approached Sarah with an expression that mixed pride, concern, and amazement. You disobeyed direct orders and endangered yourself unnecessarily, he said sternly. Yes, sir, she replied without offering excuses. You also single-handedly prevented the escape of one of the world's most wanted terrorists and captured him alive under impossible circumstances, continued. I'm not sure whether to court-martial you or recommend you for the Medal of Honor. Sarah looked up at him with tired eyes. Sir, I just did what needed to be done. Al had information about planned attacks. Letting him escape wasn't an option. Studied her for a long moment. That attitude, prioritizing mission success and civilian safety over personal safety, is exactly what we need in special operations. But you can't make unilateral decisions like that without coordination and support. Understood, sir. It won't happen again. No, said with a slight smile. I suspect it will happen again. That's exactly the kind of decision-making we need. We just need to train the rest of the team to support you when it does. As the operation concluded, and Al was transported to a secure facility for interrogation, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much had changed since that first day when Jake had questioned whether a SEAL that week belonged in special operations. She had proven her capabilities beyond any doubt, but more importantly, she had discovered that true strength came not from individual achievement, but from understanding how to serve something greater than herself. The final phase of selection would focus not on what the candidates could accomplish alone, but on how well they could function as part of an elite team dedicated to protecting their country and its values. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same briefing room where her journey had begun, but everything had changed. The woman who had once been questioned for her place among elite warriors now wore the insignia of the most exclusive special operations unit in the military. Beside her sat Jake, no longer the arrogant SEAL who had dismissed her capabilities, but a trusted teammate and friend. The morning briefing was being conducted by Colonel, but the atmosphere was different from those early days of selection. The 12 individuals who had survived the complete training program sat with the quiet confidence of operators who had proven themselves under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Your first official mission as a team, announced, will take you to Southeast Asia, where intelligence suggests a network of human traffickers is operating with the protection of corrupt local officials. The victims are primarily women and children, and conventional law enforcement approaches have been ineffective. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with missions involving vulnerable populations. Her father's teachings about protecting those who cannot protect themselves had shaped her entire worldview, and operations like this one represented why she had joined Special Forces in the first place. Jake noticed her reaction and leaned over slightly. "You okay?" She nodded, appreciating his concern. Their friendship had deepened considerably during the months of training that followed Al's capture. Jake had become not just a colleague, but a genuine friend who understood her motivations and respected her methods. "The traffickers are well-armed and operate from a fortified compound in a remote area," continued. "Local law enforcement has been compromised, so we cannot rely on any support from official channels. This will be a completely independent operation." Master Sergeant, who had become their primary instructor after the canyon incident, stood to address the tactical aspects. "Intelligence suggests approximately 25 armed guards protecting the compound. We estimate 60 to 80 victims are being held there at any given time." The mission parameters were challenging, but not unprecedented. What made this operation special was that it would be the first time the newly formed team would operate together in a real-world environment with actual lives hanging in the balance. Dr. Watson, who had conducted psychological evaluations throughout their training, addressed the emotional aspects of the mission. "Rescue operations involving trafficking victims require special considerations. The people you're trying to save may not trust you initially, and some may have been conditioned to fear any outside intervention." Sarah raised her hand. "Ma'am, what resources will we have for victim care after the rescue?" "Excellent question," Dr. Watson replied. "We've coordinated with international aid organizations who will provide medical care and psychological support. Your job is to get them to safety. Their recovery will be handled by specialists." The planning phase took 3 weeks, with every detail scrutinized and contingency plans developed for multiple scenarios. Sarah found herself taking a leadership role in planning the victim extraction procedures, drawing on her father's teachings about protecting vulnerable people. Jake contributed his expertise in assault operations and tactical coordination. The balance between his aggressive capabilities and Sarah's protective instincts created a synergy that made their combined effectiveness greater than either could achieve alone. The team dynamics had evolved significantly since those early days of selection. Sarah was no longer seen as an outsider proving herself. She was an integral part of a unit that had learned to blend different strengths and perspectives into unified effectiveness. Danny, now a full member of the team, had become their primary communications specialist. Tony Martinez handled logistics and supply coordination. Maria Santos specialized in medical support and victim care protocols. Each member had found their niche within the team structure. The deployment to Southeast Asia began with a covert insertion into international waters, where they transferred to a civilian fishing vessel that would take them to their operational area. The transition from the sterile environment of the training facility to the humid, crowded conditions of actual operations was jarring, but familiar from previous exercises. Sarah spent the journey reviewing intelligence files on the trafficking network and studying psychological profiles of typical victims. The photographs and case histories were heartbreaking. Young women and children who had been promised legitimate work opportunities only to find themselves trapped in modern slavery. Jake used the travel time to coordinate with intelligence assets who would provide real-time information during the operation. His natural aggressiveness had been refined by months of additional training, but his fundamental drive to close with and destroy the enemy remained unchanged. The compound was located in a remote area accessible only by narrow dirt roads that could be easily controlled. Satellite imagery showed a fortified central building surrounded by smaller structures, with guard towers providing overwatch of the entire perimeter. Classic defensive setup, Jake observed as they studied the reconnaissance photos. Multiple layers of security, limited approach routes, good fields of fire for the defenders. Sarah nodded, but her focus was on different details. The victim housing appears to be in the most vulnerable part of the compound. If shooting starts, they'll be in maximum danger from crossfire. This difference in perspective had become characteristic of their partnership. Jake saw tactical problems to be solved through the application of force, while Sarah saw people to be protected through careful planning and execution. Master Sergeant had taught them that both perspectives were valuable, and the best operations blended aggressive action with protective care. Your assault team will neutralize the security forces. Your team will secure the victims and coordinate evacuation. Both objectives are equally important. The infiltration began at midnight, with the team moving in two groups through dense jungle terrain toward their objectives. Sarah's group included Santos and two other operators whose primary mission was victim rescue and care. Jake's group consisted of himself, Martinez, and the remaining team members who would conduct the assault on the compound's security forces. Their job was to create enough chaos and confusion that the victim rescue could proceed without interference. The approach to the compound took 4 hours of careful movement through difficult terrain. Sarah's martial arts training proved invaluable once again, as her ability to move silently through dense vegetation allowed her team to reach their positions without detection. Jake's team positioned themselves at the main gate, where the majority of the security forces were concentrated. Their plan called for a simultaneous assault on multiple points that would overwhelm the defenders before they could organize effective resistance. At 400 hours, the operation began with coordinated explosions that destroyed the main gate and 2 guard towers simultaneously. Jake's team moved through the breach with practiced precision, engaging surprised guards who were still trying to understand what was happening. Sarah's team approached the victim housing from the opposite direction, using the confusion created by the assault to penetrate the compound's defenses undetected. Her first sight of the conditions inside the trafficking compound filled her with cold rage. Dozens of frightened women and children packed into cramped, filthy rooms with minimal food or sanitation. "This is rescue team," she reported through her radio. "We have approximately 70 victims in multiple buildings, beginning evacuation procedures now." The victims' reactions to the rescue team were mixed and heartbreaking. Some cowered in terror, believing that these armed strangers represented a new threat. Others clung desperately to Sarah and her teammates, recognizing salvation when they saw it. Sarah drew on every lesson her father had taught her about compassion and patience. Moving slowly and speaking softly, she began the delicate process of convincing traumatized people that they were truly being rescued. "We're here to help you," she repeated in 3 different languages, her voice gentle despite the sound of gunfire echoing from other parts of the compound. "You're safe now. We're taking you home." Maria Santos worked alongside her, providing medical assessment and treatment for victims who showed signs of serious injury or illness. The conditions they discovered were worse than intelligence reports had suggested. Malnutrition was widespread, and several victims required immediate medical attention. Jake's assault team was encountering fierce resistance from the compound's security forces. The traffickers fought with desperate determination, knowing that capture would mean life imprisonment at minimum. But they were facing opponents who had trained for exactly this scenario. "Assault team to control," Jake reported as his team cleared the main building. "Heavy resistance from approximately 15 defenders. We're making progress, but they're fighting hard." The battle for the compound continued for 23 minutes, with Jake's team methodically clearing defensive positions, while Sarah's team evacuated victims through a route that avoided the heaviest fighting. The coordination between assault and rescue operations was flawless, demonstrating how months of training had forged them into a unified team. The turning point came when Jake's team captured the compound's commanding officer, a former military officer who had organized the trafficking network's security operations. Faced with overwhelming force and no realistic hope of escape, he ordered his remaining men to surrender. "Assault team to rescue team," Jake's voice came through the radio with evident relief. "Compound is secure. All hostile forces neutralized or captured. How's the evacuation going?" Sarah looked around at the group of frightened but hopeful faces surrounding her. 72 victims secured and ready for extraction. Medical team reports 3 requiring immediate hospital care, but all are stable. The extraction phase required different skills entirely. Moving 72 traumatized civilians through jungle terrain to an evacuation point was logistically complex and emotionally challenging. Many of the victims were weakened by malnutrition and abuse, while others were struggling with psychological trauma that made them fearful of any change in their situation. Sarah found herself drawing on lessons from her childhood, when her father had taught her that true martial arts involved protecting and nurturing others rather than simply defeating enemies. Every victim who reached safety represented a victory more meaningful than any combat achievement. The helicopter evacuation took place at dawn, with international aid workers and medical personnel taking custody of the rescued victims. As Sarah watched the helicopters disappear toward proper medical facilities, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with mission accomplishment reports. Jake approached her as they prepared their own extraction. "You did good work today," he said simply. "We all did," Sarah replied. "This is why we do this job." The debriefing back at their base facility revealed the full scope of what they had accomplished. The trafficking network they had dismantled had been operating for 5 years, with estimated victims in the hundreds. The intelligence gathered during the raid led to arrests across 3 countries and the rescue of additional victims from other locations. Colonel addressed the team with visible pride. "This operation represents exactly the kind of mission this unit was created to accomplish. You combined tactical excellence with humanitarian objectives, achieving complete success while prioritizing the safety of innocent civilians." General, who had flown in specifically for the debriefing, added her own perspective. "The integration of different skills and philosophies within this team has created capabilities that exceed anything we had previously achieved. Your leadership in the victim rescue phase was exemplary. Your tactical coordination was flawless." But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Master had flown in from his dojo to attend a ceremony recognizing his daughter's achievements. The elderly martial arts instructor looked small and unassuming among the military brass, but his presence meant everything to Sarah. "I am proud of you, daughter," he said quietly as they walked through the base gardens after the ceremony. "You have used your abilities to protect those who needed protection. This is the highest purpose of martial arts." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. "I tried to remember everything you taught me, Dad, about responsibility, about protecting others, about using strength wisely." Master nodded with satisfaction. "You have learned well, but your greatest lesson is still ahead of you." "What do you mean?" "You have proven that you belong among these elite warriors. Now you must help others find their own paths to greatness. The teacher's responsibility is greater than the student's." Jake joined them as they walked, having been invited by Sarah to meet her father. The introduction was warm, with Master treating the Navy SEAL with the same courtesy he showed all his daughter's friends. "Mr. Master said, I understand that you and my daughter began as opponents but became allies." Jake smiled, remembering their first encounter. "Your daughter taught me that strength comes in many forms, sir. I'm grateful for that lesson." "And what lesson did you teach her?" Jake considered the question carefully. "I think I taught her that confidence and determination have value too, that sometimes you need to be willing to act decisively, even when the outcome is uncertain." Master nodded approvingly. "Good. True partnerships involve mutual teaching. You have both become stronger through your friendship." As the months passed, Sarah and Jake's unit deployed on increasingly complex missions that tested every aspect of their training and teamwork. They rescued hostages from terrorist compounds, disrupted weapons trafficking networks, and conducted reconnaissance operations in the world's most dangerous regions. Their partnership became legendary within special operations circles. Sarah's tactical brilliance and protective instincts perfectly complemented Jake's aggressive leadership and decisive action. Together, they represented a new model for special operations, one that valued both strength and wisdom, courage and compassion. The young woman who had once been questioned for her fitness among elite warriors had become a leader who helped redefine what elite warriors could accomplish. The arrogant SEAL who had dismissed her capabilities had learned to value perspectives different from his own, becoming a more effective operator in the process. Years later, when new candidates arrived for selection at the elite training facility, they would hear stories about the day a small woman knocked out a Navy SEAL in front of 250 witnesses. But more importantly, they would learn about how two very different warriors had forged a partnership that made them both better than they could ever have been alone. Sarah continued to carry her father's teachings about the responsibility that came with strength, but she had expanded that understanding to include the responsibility of leadership and mentorship. She became known throughout the special operations community not just for her individual achievements, but for her ability to bring out the best in others. Jake discovered that his natural aggressiveness and confidence were most valuable when channeled toward protecting others and accomplishing missions that served a greater purpose. His leadership style evolved to incorporate the wisdom Sarah had taught him, making him more effective than he had ever been as a purely aggressive operator. The question that had started their relationship, a SEAL that week, had been answered in ways that neither could have anticipated. True strength had nothing to do with size, gender, or conventional measures of power. It had everything to do with character, competence, and the willingness to serve something greater than oneself. Their story became part of the training curriculum at special operations schools across the military, not as an example of individual achievement, but as a demonstration of how different strengths could be combined to create capabilities that transcended what anyone had thought possible. And in a small dojo in Sarah's, Master continued to teach students about the responsibility that came with martial arts training. But now he had a new story to tell about his daughter and her friend, who had learned that the greatest victory was not in defeating opponents, but in transforming them into allies in service of protecting others. The legacy they created extended far beyond their own careers, inspiring a new generation of special operations personnel who understood that true elite status came not from individual supremacy, but from the ability to work together in pursuit of justice, protection of the innocent, and service to ideals greater than themselves. Their journey from conflict to partnership, from misunderstanding to mutual respect, had proven that the most powerful force in the world was not the strongest individual warrior, but a team of committed people who had learned to blend their different strengths in service of a common purpose. In the end, the question had never really been whether Sarah was strong enough to belong among elite warriors. The real question had been whether elite warriors were wise enough to recognize strength in all its forms and humble enough to learn from those who approached their calling from different perspectives. The answer, written in the success of countless missions and the lives they had saved, was definitively yes.